This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so without further ado, I will hand it over to Anne LeCure.
Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. It is my distinct honor to introduce Clayton Evans, who is AOB's Deputy Director and is today's featured artist and speaker. Let me mention that Clayton has dedicated most of his professional career to creative learning and well-being for youth and families. He teaches and has taught art to students of every age, from kindergartners to retired adults. Prior to joining AOB in 2014, Clayton led two distinguished organizations in New York City, the Leroy Neiman Art Center in Harlem and Leave Out Violence US, or Love Us. And during that time, Clayton was honored with the Pacesetter Award for exceptional youth service in New York City. He received his bachelor's degree in arts and studio arts with an education minor from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania and a master's of fine arts in painting from MICA here in Maryland. Locally, Clayton is a member of the Leadership Montgomery class of 2018. For me, it's a true honor to work with Clayton. He is a trusted guiding presence in our studio and on our management team. And honestly, I've never had a conversation with Clayton from which I wasn't somehow encouraged and motivated to grow. That brings me to our event today. Block Talks give us a chance to spend focused time listening to and learning from artists about their work, and to get behind the scenes and view the creative practice from a different lens. And then also to have conversations about it together. Block Talks originated as a practice with our apprentices inside our PYAO studio, and they continue to happen there as a learning tool and an experience that we all enjoy. As we've grown, we've also been presenting them publicly and experimenting today with presenting them online. So we're genuinely happy to welcome you today. And with that, can I ask you to put your hands up for Clayton Evans?
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. The title of my block talk is called Making Art During COVID-19. Now, this presentation, I am reading from some notes, so I hope that won't be too distracting to you all. This presentation is will not be a how to make art during a pandemic and the psychological benefits, et cetera, of that. So apologies if the title has misiled anyone. I am going to share what is keeping me creative and challenged and centered and calm in my studio during these strange and anxiety-inducing times. I am here to share aspects of my most recent series of paintings that are an extension of past series that I have been working on. I do want to, I will be sharing a few artists and art influences from a myriad of subjects that have contributed to my work. I do want to recognize these artists. I am not providing the titles of the specific paintings, so apologies to those artists in advance, and you will see their names come up next to paintings in this series. So I will be providing quite a bit of context around the artwork that you'll see, and you'll see a little preview in the next few slides. So I am creating urban artifacts. These are paintings and objects that, if they survive the test of time in 1,000 years or so, might be discovered, dug up perhaps, and puzzled over by future archaeologists as symbols representing our culture. So all apologies if they dig up my piece and not something you created. I believe this documentation of our culture is the most important and essential role of an artist. The archaeologists will discover that these works do not have a function such as an arrowhead or a bowl or a vessel that held wine, or nor anything to do with communications in terms of digital communication, like VHSs and beta players, if anyone remembers that, Walkmans, PDAs, or of course cell phones. Unless the future archaeologists are wildly off-base or highly imaginative, my new urban artifacts are not depictions of what beasts roamed the lands, or, Lord forbid, an illustration of who was currently in power and the great deeds that they did. These artifacts are meant to be an homage to a city I was born in and grew up in, New York City, and a nod toward a nostalgia of visiting my maternal grandmother, Nancy Bell, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and eventually moving into Bed-Stuy as an adult and appreciating the unique architecture of these lovely, bold structures. These artifacts are celebrations of the density and diversity of the city, forever changing, yet remaining the same. As you can see from this preview of slides, I will be sharing a lot of contextual work that influenced me. Yeah, I'll be going on for that. These are not actual pictures of my grandmother's living place, but the bottom left corner is an actual picture of the front of the building that I lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I want to just quickly recognize, in terms of inspiration, certainly my core family, my partner Kristen and my son Alan and my daughter Ruby are great inspirations for me, so I thank them for that. I often feel challenged and inspired, especially by Ruby, who is 7 years old, but her volume and quality of artwork cannot be matched. So I sometimes when she's in her studio, that reminds me, oh, I need to be in my studio. My mother and oldest brother were an art artist, and they are my primary inspirations to be an artist. My oldest brother graduated from Pratt Institute, and we're still supporting and inspiring each other to get in the studio and make something. I developed an interest in brownstones since visiting my grandmother for 1 week stretches during the summer. My grandmother lived in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and the brownstone she lived in was filled with mysteries, great mysteries for a 6 through 10-year-old. From the creaking wooden steps to the empty, dusty, shell-shaped nooks at the top of each stairwell, to the smell of tobacco and perfume, sweat, cooked savory foods. I remember my nose twisting each time I initially entered her brownstone, but then adjusting to the aromas by the day's end, and even missing it once I left. Papa Smitty was my step-grandfather. How's that for some Southern flavor? Papa Smitty. Papa Smitty had a dog named Skippy, who was very protective and would bark or growl if you came within 5 feet of my grandfather. Papa Smitty's bedroom was separated from my grandmother's, but his bed was also separated from the front room with beads. If Papa Smitty was out of the house, Skippy was assuredly right there at the front of his room, right behind the beads, protecting his room. and he would growl anytime I even stepped near there. So if I was always curious, of course, to go into his room, especially when my grandmother would often warn me, you know, you might get cut on something or the dog would chew on you. She once told me if you poke around in there, something's going to crawl out and bite you. So those warnings, of course, raised my curiosity. And for the most part, when I stayed with my grandmother and step-grandfather, or Papa Smitty, I was an obedient kid for the most part. My grandmother never left me alone in the house. And once in a while, a friend would come and they would be engaged in a discussion in the front room. And Papa Smitty would be out of the house with Skippy. And it was during these times, these rare moments, that I would explore Papa Smitty's room. And my eye would just dart around from every corner, ceiling to floor. I would take it all in. I never found anything as wondrous as my imagination provided. You know, half-open boxes and stacks of dusty newspapers and pipes and tins of tobacco and empty liquor bottles and black and white photos and leather chairs and hats, lots of hats. He wore a fedora. He never went outside the house without his fedora. I would make a quick survey of the room and then get out. It was probably 2 minutes. It felt like 10 minutes. My imagination of stories behind each object just went wild, and leaving the room, my heart would just be pounding out of my chest, but the feeling was great. I was caught once or twice, and my grandmother would reprimand me and give me those warnings that I mentioned, and I think on some level she understood my need to sate my curiosity. This is a bit of an armchair analysis, but I feel working on the subject of brownstones takes me back to being with my grandmother and Papa Smitty, who were just two beautiful, loving, courageous, because they were part of that great migration from the South with nothing in their pockets. And they were just such kind people and loving people, and I dearly miss them. So the slides that I've been showing are, again, an homage to them and to that sense of the brownstones. I started making these brownstone paintings before and after grad school. These pieces went from straight representations of buildings to abstractions of their facades and other elements surrounding them, such as fire escapes and alleyways, stoops, and sidewalks. In 1997, my fiance and I moved into a brownstone in Bed-Stuy, which turned out to be about 5 blocks away from where my grandmother once lived. Eventually, Alan was born, and I recall taking him to a park across the street from where my grandmother eventually used to live. And this is where he refined his bike riding skills. This was the same park she would bring me to when I had my truck or Kung Fu Grip, G.I. Joe doll, or whatever the toy was that I was allowed to bring. And she would sit me on a patch of grass, and I had fond memories of that park. Being immersed once again in the heart of Brooklyn inspired me to make the majority of these paintings. Many of which were titled Brownstone Downstone, but I think you'll see some of them were titled Urban Artifacts. All right, so during this time I was teaching youth about abstraction, about many elements of art, but abstraction certainly came up, and I often referred to Mondrian. So here are some images of his work, of course. And I was most fascinated with his transition from being he was a Dutch artist actually, but he studied in German Expressionism, and he wound up moving towards this, what he would consider a purity of space, towards being a leading 21st century abstract artist. I was certainly influenced heavily by Romare Bearden, in this piece in particular is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's probably one of my favorite pieces of art. And they don't show it often because it's very sensitive to light. But when they do, I usually just made a beeline straight to that painting every time. Alma Thomas, abstract color field painter, African-American woman, was also someone that I learned and grew to appreciate. I also appreciate the works of Paul Klee, Basquiat, Richard Diebenkorn, my undergrad professor, Ed Kearns, and I actually have a piece of his in my house, which I should have put that slide up. Sam Gilliam, who's a Washington, D.C. native and still going strong with art. Edward Hopper, Norman Lewis. I love the way that they played with colors, depicted urban environments, gave spaces a sense of awareness and presence, explored landscapes, and teetered between abstraction and objective art. I was aware of Louise Nevelson, but didn't associate my work with hers until most recently. And many of you probably know there's a wonderful treasure of Louise Nevelson works at the Portrait Gallery on 8th Street. So the next step of, So lastly, I do have a few pictures of works of that have also influenced me. And these are, it's a fascination with uncovering ancient cultures, both the objects found, which are the artifacts, and the aesthetics of the dig site itself. I realize the grid of these dig sites is namely the residue of the archaeologist's forensic practices. But there's something fascinating about the cordoning off of sections and then the slow digging into the ground and the thoughtfulness behind it and the respect that they pay to these artifacts that they eventually lift out of the ground. The artifacts they find are often rusted and fused with minerals, scratched, pale, stripped of once vibrant colors, long since dissolved by water, soil, sand, or perhaps even volcanic soot that they were buried under. All right, so that finally leads to the current series of work. And I want to thank Pyramid Atlantic for their 10 by 10 show, because that often sparks my, it often reminds me, hey, I don't need to go big immediately. I can work on some smaller pieces and do a lot of those. So the most current series, as I was titling, is urban artifacts. And this series is reflective of, you might say, a culmination of many of the different elements and contexts that I gave to you originally. The most recent series is not complete, but they are close. And I am providing insight into, as if you're visiting my studio. So these larger pieces that you'll see, number 7 through 11, are pieces that I was working on as recently as this Sunday. And these are acrylic paint and various forms of wood on plywood. And they are meant to be seen, I see them as individual pieces, but also for that group of pieces, I see as a triptych. Next steps may involve the integration of wires or some kind of stitching similar to Corinne. I am interested in that process of mending, or what I call suturing. And apologies to medical professionals, because the suturing is pretty rough. This is a whole other series of work, and I give a shout out to Chris Barclay for partnering with me on this series of work. This is one piece of several. This is called Black Boys in Greenhouses, Greenhouse Effect. And I namely call up this series because you can see a detail on one of those panels of the hardware and the stitching and the mending and the suturing that might take place. So some of these things might be placed into this next series. I'm a little deliberate about making that step because I work on plywood, and drilling holes and doing all of those different things into the wood, it's hard to go back from that. So I might use some of my nascent Photoshop skills and put some of those elements together so that I can anticipate what this composition might look like if I integrate those wires and other things. I'm just sending you. Okay, and then this is a very quick view of my studio. And I think I have a couple of process photos there. Sorry, they went out of order, but I thank you. And I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Clayton. Wow, so many things to think about and talk about. And Chloe, I think we have some questions in the chat box. And I think we want to do the unmute so that folks can speak their question aloud?
Yeah, I think
So-
that's a good idea. So I guess I am going to call on Chris. Can you ask your question?
Cool. Clayton, lots of questions, and I'll only start with how did you choose your color palette? Like, that was really get a feel for a set of colors that you use, and how did that, or maybe the why of it?
Sure. I mean, I think some of it, it's certainly warm, earthy colors, rich hues. These are the colors that I'm drawn to when I used to look out the window of my Bed-Stuy apartment. I don't know if you ever saw A Room with a View, Alfred Hitchcock movie. There's a wonderful, I mean, it's based on someone who's wheelchair bound, and they're seeing some things happening in the windows across their alleyway. And but some of the pictures of that, I think it's one of the first black and white, or I don't know if it is, but it was just wonderful depiction of a city scene in the evening, and the warm lights and the different lights that are quality of lights that are coming from those windows, with set against the silhouette of the building and the solidity of the building. So that's probably where I'm inspired. It's like kind of creating that mood and warmth of these particular urban settings. Thank you, Chris.
Hear from Lisa. Can you ask your question? Hold on, Lisa. I don't think we can hear you. I think you're on mute still.
Okay. You hear?
That's
Yeah.
better, yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Clayton, I love these pieces, especially the newer pieces. And my question is, do you have the final image in mind? Or do you move when you begin, or do you move the pieces around and change the colors as you work?
I do get a vision of a potential end point, or maybe it's a way, marker or something. And then I vary sometimes. Sometimes I'll sketch that out, but sometimes sketching and writing about it vents out the energy around it. So I'll just start making something. And so yeah, for some of these pieces, I did have a vision of the endpoint in mind. For these smaller pieces, I would say no. And I see these almost like mosaic pieces where many of them were painted separately, and then I started composing them into the square shape. And then I would paint over them and strip them away and paint over them and do some other stuff to them. This piece was definitely a piece that kind of formed as I was going. So yeah, it really does vary, but I knew I wanted to do a piece with stripes. So it was just a matter of the thickness and thinness of the stripes and the different colors here. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay, let's hear from June.
Yay, June.
Unmuted. Hi, Clayton. That's wonderful, and the work is fabulous. I have a couple questions. One has to do with, did you envision the triptych as a triptych, or did it evolve that way? And the other one has to do with talking more about the suturing and the sewing. In that, the use, because that's also a line. And what is your thinking about that, and what is your thinking about the line?
Yes. So as you can see from this picture, in terms of this being a triptych, and these pieces are still not fully complete. So I can see it as both, but I also like them as individual pieces. So I'm still, that's still something that I'm puzzling over. And it's fun to puzzle over that. It feels good to get them to that particular point. In terms of the suturing, for me, that goes back to, there's this craftsmanship in this building that I really appreciate. Like, I build these wooden structures. So I have lots of power tools and all of that kind of stuff. I think I showed you a picture of a steam box, and I'll get to it. Oops. On the left is a steam box that I built based on some YouTube videos, so that I can, and on the right are the molds that you can bend wood around. So I really have this appreciation for the craftsmanship and just manipulation of materials, and the stitching and sewing and pulling canvas and other things together is part of that. For the Black Boys in Green Houses series, it's more suturing, and that deals with, some of the contextual elements of that series around young men of color being targets and etc., which that's a whole other block talk. But yeah, I hope I answered your question there.
Yes, thank you.
I think we maybe have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear from Tanaya. Looks like you had a couple questions.
Hello.
Hello,
So my main question that I have in regards to like all the inspiration that you've gathered, like how would you organize that? Like, would you create like vision boards of inspiration from like certain pieces that you feel kind of speak to each other, or would you like look at each piece or each artist like individually?
Yeah, I mean, like at least right now in my studio, I don't have pictures of these artists' work up on my studio wall. You know, I'm a little on the old side there, Tanaya. So, you know, I've come across these artists through, of course, classes that I took, and then, you know, my professors recommending me look at people, and then going to exhibitions on these people. So I've accumulated, you know, an interest in these artists' work over time. So when I go into the studio and I'm working, especially on this piece, I'm not thinking about, you know, Alma Thomas's stripe paintings. So it was a really neat thing to then juxtapose this painting next to hers, because maybe subconsciously I was thinking about Alma Thomas's work, and or Ed Kern's work, or, you know, other people. So yeah, I don't necessarily have a vision board of, you know, with these artists and swatches of their work, and I think that's fine if if that's how some people want to work and get motivated and do stuff. But yeah, I just kind of keep their art in mind. And I've accumulated some books, so there are some things I can just kind of bring down and reference. But yeah, I just try to work with a clean slate, and knowing that though there will be those influences as I'm creating this work.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. Hey, I thank you all for your time and attention, and I appreciate you allowing me to take you from my grandmother's brownstone to my little old studio in Silver Spring. So thank you.
And everybody joined me in thanking Clayton. What a rare and wonderful opportunity to get to know him in a way that we don't always get to spend time looking at his work and hear from inside his studio. So let me just remind that our show, Arts on the Virtual Block, closes on May 29th. So be sure to scroll on over to see that show. I'm also very happy to share that Chris Barclay will be presenting a block talk on June 12th. And there will be a gallery exhibition show that goes along with that, and stay tuned for more information. Stay tuned also for more details on our summer programs from Arts on the Block. You see so many of our team members here who are all hard at work in the studio building a really wonderful summer experience. So with that, I'll say so long for now, and thanks for joining us, and see you again soon.
Hi, Clayton. Nice to see you. Dennis from Canada.
Bye. Oh.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
And folks, our phone line is open, so if you do want to chat, feel free. We'll stay here for a few minutes.
Clayton, can you see me? Dennis here. Dennis Adams from your old days at Love.
Oh my gosh, Dennis.
Yeah.
Well, I can't see you, but I definitely hear you.
I'm terrible with this stuff. I'll try to get a visual on myself if I can. Here we go. I think I got it. There we are.
Oh my goodness, Dennis. Hello. Sorry, folks.
The comment I have is I'm just so proud of you. I mean, I always knew you were an incredible artist, but this brings the world class comes to mind as I listened today, and so articulate, so well done. I miss you. That's my last words.
I need to, folks. Dennis is one of the most exceptional youth workers I have ever met. I admire you 1,000 times over, dude. I mean, and it's you're it's wonderful.
How
It's
do you
wonderful.
two know each other? What's the story?
I was the executive director of Leave Out Violence US. Dennis is the deputy director at Leave Out Violence Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And you still are, or where are you at?
Yeah, I am. I have a new title. I forget what it was now. Something chief harmony officer.
All right. Dennis, was also a minor league. He was drafted by the Boston Red Sox, and I don't hold that against him, being a Yankee fan.
I've come all the way over, by the way. Go Yanks.
No, I haven't seen Dennis since 2013, maybe 2012, but it's wonderful to see you. Wonderful.
This is my day. You just made my day. Seclusion's not so bad.
Fabulous.
I'll have to give you a call. I want to know how your family's doing. Sorry to make this a personal call, but
No.
I love this guy. Just love this man.
No, this is a gift. This is fabulous.
Yeah. What a contribution you gave. Hopefully we'll get back to New York. That's one of the things I have in mind, by the way.
All right.
And we'll be calling you.
Yeah. Please do. I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland now, but I'll get up to New York to see you.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Just an overall comment again. Outstanding presentation today. Wow. All I can say is wow. World class, I guess is the word. That's all I can say. Proud. I feel proud that you're my friend.
Thank you. Well, I so appreciate that. That's one. That's such a gift. Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Oh gosh.
Dennis, let me share that we will have a recording of this up on our site just before the show closes. So, and it occurs to me, Clayton, that we should share that. I'm sure there are many people who would love to hear about your work, who have worked with you along the way.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There might be a few.
I'm sure legacy is a word I hope you use when you sit down, because that's what you're doing. You're trailblazing a legacy, no question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Unforgettable. You're unforgettable.
We have to. I actually have to sign off because in 5 minutes we have a meeting with what we call our studio crew. These are 20-somethings who have graduated out of high school, most likely, and they're now local. And we've even through the pandemic, we've been able to employ them, and we're
wonderful.
just meeting with all of them online. So we just need to prep for that.
I feel selfish anyway. I'm going to have to get off this call. Spend some time in the backyard with my wife, so doing things in the backyard.
Well, I'm loving some of the interior stuff that you got going on there with the.
Oh, thank you. My wife, she's very creative. Very creative.
Dennis, thank you. Thank you.
A pleasure to be here. I'm throwing love from Canada to you guys. Hopefully this thing ends soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please.
Bye
for now.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Keep up the great work.
Will do. Thank you.